Hey, welcome back to Neuroscience, guys and gals. We are going to be talking about the different kinds of signal transmission next. So we're going to start with electrical signal transmission between neurons. If you remember from the last video, we talked about the synapse, and the synapse is where the magic happens, magic being communication between the neurons. So how does this communication actually take place? So signal transmission happens by a combination of processes. And the type of process that we're going to talk about in this video is our electrical processes. We've talked about the brain using 10 to 15 watts of energy. That's about like a nightlight, a little over a nightlight. What your brain is doing is converting metabolic energy. Your brain loves glucose, loves it. Glucose is like brain cake, right? So your brain takes the energy it gets from glucose and converts it into electrical energy. Okay, so your neurons are pulsing with electrical energy in order to communicate with one another. Let's talk about how this happens. So this is just you can get a basic idea of how information gets into and through a neuron to another neuron, right? So things are going to come in the dendrites, right? This is where information comes in. Your cell body is going to be doing some calculations, integrating all of these signals. Then when your neuron decides to fire, it's going to send a signal down the axon, out the terminal buttons, onto the dendrites of another neuron. Okay? So let's see a very super quick little demonstration of what neurons I was looking for neurotransmitter images. What neurons look like when they're firing. So check it out. That's pretty cool, I think. Let's play it again. It's like Christmas. Okay. So that's what neurons look like when they're firing. Now we want to know how a neuron does this. How does the neuron actually fire? What makes it happen? So we talk about the basics of electrical transmission. And when we talk about these basics, we talk about things like charged ions. Okay, so our bodies are full of ions, all kinds of different ions. We've got sodium, potassium, calcium, right? And these ions are either positively or negatively charged. And what they do is they create membrane potentials for cells. And what that is a difference in voltage across a cell membrane. So a cell's membrane potential is the current difference in voltage caused by ions between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. Okay, for a neuron, baseline membrane potential, like when they're just hanging out or just resting, is called resting potential. And when a neuron is resting, it's said to be polarized. So over here is this is our resting neuron guy here. And here's the inside of the membrane. Here's the cytosol. Okay, so here's in and here is out. And here you see potassium, and potassium is positively charged. Here we've got sodium. Sodium is also positively charged, but because we have a difference in numbers between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, the resting potential for the neuron is going to be somewhere around -77, although -70, give or take a little bit, millivolts, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But when the cell is resting like this, it's said to be polarized. Okay. When a neuron fires, what's happening is depolarization. So what happens when a neuron fires, and I'm gonna show you a video of this. So we have an influx of sodium. We have, right, this is a depolarization. I have officially messed with the membrane potential, no longer at resting potential. In order to get back to resting potential, I'm going to pump out sodium, right? So here we go again. It's just starting over. I'm sorry, I said that wrong earlier. I'm going to pump potassium out. So in comes the sodium. There's the depolarization of the cell. And then out goes the potassium. And that's a repolarization of the cell. Okay? This whole depolarize, repolarize situation, that is a neuron firing, essentially. What it creates is what we call an action potential. So let's break this down a little bit into components. Okay. So let's take a look at our handy dandy chart here, and we're going to start with resting potential. Like I said, the resting potential of a neuron, which is the membrane potential when the neuron is at rest, is around, give or take a little, negative 70 millivolts. The cell body is the calculator, and actually what's happening, and I did not include a picture, so I'll just draw it here. So remember we had like our little cell, and we'll just pretend that's like our cell body. I don't know why I drew it so weird, guys. I'm not an artist. So here's our cell, and there's the axon. Well, right here, okay, right where the cell body meets the axon, this is called the axon hillock. The axon hillock. And that is where all of the calculations are kind of going on. Okay, this is the real calculator within the cell body. Okay, so the axon hillock is doing all of the calculations, and essentially what it's doing is summing excitatory and inhibitory transmissions. Okay, we will talk about what makes them excitatory and inhibitory when we get to chemical signal transmission. Essentially, it has to do with chemical receptors on the receiving end, like on the neuron that's receiving the message has receptors. Depending on which receptors are activated, that will tell the receiving cell whether it's an inhibitory or excitatory signal. Okay. Now, what happens is this summation and subtraction is going on. And when the cell reaches a threshold, a certain threshold, right, and a threshold is, a line, limit, a point, a numerical value at which something occurs. Okay, below that, nothing's going to happen. It's kind of like when I have a threshold for my 2-year-old's temper tantrums. Yeah. Okay, so when all of the summation leads to a voltage of negative 55, the neuron is going to fire. There is no turning back. Okay? You cannot pause this once the threshold is met. It's just going to happen. All right. The next thing that happens is called the action potential. And the action potential is the actual firing of the neuron, okay? And this is where all of that depolarization, repolarization stuff is happening. Okay, so the wave of membrane depolarization. So there's a wave and repolarization, okay? And this results in signal transmission for that neuron. We'll talk about how in just a little bit. Okay, now let's go through it. Quick review. You start off doing the calculations, you're just hanging out, you're taking in all of the information. When you get the kind of information that gets you to a threshold, you're like, boom, this is it. Action. The neuron fires, okay, after it reaches that threshold potential, and that firing is the action potential. Now, I will say quickly, so after you have the depolarization, which is the influx of sodium ions, right? So sodium goes in, and repolarization, potassium goes out. Here, see this little part right here? That's hyperpolarization. So your cell kind of goes a little bit overboard, repolarize, and then it's like, oh, even itself out. Now, in this little circle of time right here, the cell can't do anything. It can't refire. It's not going to, it needs that moment to itself. It needs that personal cell time. Okay, that means that a cell is only going to fire as quickly as its hyperpolarization phase will allow it to. Okay, just a side bit of information there. Now, I have a link here, this crash course I'm providing this link in the form of like a post in this folder with all of the other videos on Blackboard. So, for the sake of saving the upload time, which it would take if I showed you the whole video, it's only like 10 minutes. But I've got this video, and then there's another 10-minute video that helps explain saltatory conduction. This is really cool. It's got a lot of animations. It kind of makes it fun for you to learn about how a neuron fires with a little bit better annotation than my lovely scribblage. So check it out. Okay. Let me see where I'm at here. Right. So, like I said, there's another little bit on saltatory conduction, and saltatory conduction is actually how the action potential is going to travel the length of the axon. Okay, so let me sort of kind of show you here, but you really need to watch this video. And I again am going to post this video in Blackboard. It's going to be a link to the video. It's I recommend that you start the video. Where is it? Start at 4 minutes and 15 seconds. All this stuff before that you don't really need to listen to because you probably already know all of that stuff. But if you want to, go ahead and listen to it. It's only like it's 11 minutes. The video is 11 minutes, so it's not a huge, super long video. So essentially what it's going to talk to you about is how the action potential travels the length of the axon. And essentially what it's going to say is, look, okay, so we talked about myelin, right? This little hot dog things around the axon, right? And that's myelin. It's essentially fatty material, and the fatty material is provided by support cells, right? Schwann cells compose this fatty material that insulates the axon, right? So if we have electrical wiring in our house, we would prefer that it be insulated. Why? Because we want our electricity to go where it needs to go. Because if it doesn't, then we just lose it. We lose the charge. It has to be contained. So fat is a good insulator. Now, if we had one long hot dog around this axon, right? And we've got an action potential that starts here. Imagine this is a wave. Oh, wow. I suck at this. Okay, so we're going to imagine that this is an action potential wave, right? So we've started voltage gated channels are creating an action potential here. Now, if we had one long hot dog, right? This action potential has to travel here before it can do anything again. Okay, before the membrane will react again, because the membrane's not going to allow the membrane potential to happen where it's insulated. But because we have tiny hot dogs, right? And in between these tiny hot dogs, we have these things called the nodes of Ranvier. Nobody knows how to pronounce these, by the way. Nobody does. So we'll just say it's nodes of Ranvier. If you find someone who knows definitively like how to pronounce it, let me know. It can count as your interaction if you want. Okay, so nodes of Ranvier. Essentially what happens is you've got no fatty material here, so you can have another action potential, right? Your membrane allows for the action potential to happen here because it's not super insulated. So what happens is it's almost like a recharge. Like your membrane potential happens here. I'm sorry, your action potential like happens here, and then it's essentially thrown to here, and then 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 thrown to here. And each time it's thrown, it gets to like recharge. It's kind of like, taking rest stops along the way on a road trip. You want to make those stops. It's disaster if you try and just make it like a one big hot dog type trip, right? Okay, so this is completely and utterly incomprehensible. I understand that, but hopefully you were following along as I was doing it, so you can kind of sort of understand the basics of what this video is going to be talking about. Now, the guy that does this video is, again, way better at like drawing and doing all the cool like draw stuff as he talks. Please watch it. It's cool. It's interesting. Okay, so that's the end of the electrical processes part of signal transmission. So next time we're going to talk about chemical processes. So I will see you in the chemical processes video.